James Sullivan thought he had it all figured out. At 29, he'd built a successful marketing consultancy with his best friend of 20 years, and he'd just created what he believed was a revolutionary app idea that would change everything. LocalLink would connect small businesses with their communities through AI-powered recommendations. It was innovative, profitable, and exactly the kind of breakthrough that would secure his financial future. For months, James shared every detail of his vision with Robert Chen, the person he trusted most in the world. They brainstormed together, refined the business plan together, and dreamed about the success they'd build together. Robert was supportive, encouraging, and seemed genuinely excited about James's potential. But when James was finally ready to pitch his idea to investors, he discovered something that shattered his world completely. His revolutionary app already existed, launched 3 weeks earlier under a different name, by his best friend Robert, using James's exact concept, his marketing language, and even his personal story of inspiration. What James discovered next would transform him from a trusting entrepreneur into someone who understood the true meaning of strategic revenge. Because Robert had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated the man whose life he'd just destroyed. If you're ready for a story that will show you how betrayal can become the foundation for the most satisfying justice imaginable, then you're in exactly the right place. But before we dive into this shocking tale of friendship, theft, and the ultimate takedown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because stories like this will leave you questioning everyone you trust and remind you that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be destroyed. This could be huge, James. The timing is perfect. People are craving authentic connections, especially after everything we've been through with the pandemic. Local businesses are struggling, and consumers are more conscious about supporting their communities. Exactly. And the technology is finally there to make it work seamlessly. Machine learning, location services, payment processing, all the pieces exist. We just need to put them together in the right way. They talked for hours, with Robert helping James refine the concept, identify potential challenges, and think through the business strategy. It was what they'd always done. James would come up with the innovative ideas, and Robert would help him figure out how to make them work in the real world. You should do this, Robert said finally. This isn't just a good idea, James. This could change everything for you. For us. You really think so? I know so. And I want to help however I can. I'm not the technical guy, but I can help with the business side, the marketing strategy, connecting with potential investors. James felt a surge of gratitude for his best friend. This was why their friendship had lasted so long. Robert always believed in him, always supported his dreams, always wanted to see him succeed. I couldn't do this without you, Rob. I mean that. You won't have to. We're a team, remember? We've always been a team. That conversation marked the beginning of what James thought would be the most exciting chapter of his life. He had a revolutionary idea, a clear vision for how to execute it, and the support of his best friend and business partner. Everything seemed perfectly aligned for success. He had no way of knowing that he'd just shared his future with the person who would steal it from him. Over the next few weeks, James threw himself into developing LocalLink with an intensity that surprised even him. He spent every spare moment working on the concept, researching the market, studying the competition, and beginning to build a prototype. His apartment became a command center, with whiteboards covered in flowcharts, sticky notes outlining features, and multiple monitors displaying code and design mock-ups. Robert was incredibly supportive throughout the process. He attended every brainstorming session, offered feedback on every iteration, and helped James think through the business implications of each decision. When James needed to bounce ideas off someone, Robert was always available. When James hit technical roadblocks, Robert helped him think through alternative approaches. You're really onto something here, Robert said during one of their weekly coffee meetings, reviewing James's latest business plan draft. The market research is solid, the technical approach is sound, and the revenue projections are conservative but promising. You think investors will be interested? I think investors will be fighting over this. But James, you need to be careful about how you approach them. This idea is gold, and you want to make sure you maintain control. Robert's advice was always practical and business-focused. He helped James understand the importance of intellectual property protection, the nuances of investor negotiations, and the strategic considerations that would determine LocalLink's success or failure. Have you thought about filing for patents? Robert asked during another meeting. I've been so focused on building the prototype that I haven't gotten to the legal stuff yet. You should prioritize that. An idea this good needs to be protected. I can connect you with a patent attorney I know. She's expensive, but she's the best. James appreciated Robert's guidance. While he was strong on the technical side, the business and legal aspects of entrepreneurship were still new to him. Having Robert's experience and network to draw on felt like a huge advantage. As the months passed, James's prototype evolved into something truly impressive. The AI recommendation engine was learning and adapting beautifully. The user interface was intuitive and engaging. The business dashboard provided valuable analytics while remaining simple enough for small business owners to use effectively. "This is incredible," Robert said, testing the latest version on his phone. "The recommendations are spot on, and the whole experience feels seamless. James, you've really created something special here." "Thanks, Rob. I couldn't have done it without your feedback and support. That's what friends are for." "So what's the next step?" "I think it's time to start talking to investors. The prototype is solid enough to demonstrate the concept, and I've got enough market research to support the business case." "I agree. And James, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Watching you build this from an idea into something real has been amazing. You're going to change the world with this." James felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee they were drinking. Having Robert's belief and support meant everything to him. They'd been through so much together over the years, and now Robert was helping him pursue the biggest dream of his life. "I want you to be part of this, Rob. I mean really part of it. When LocalLink takes off, I want you there with me." "I appreciate that, James. Let's see how things develop. Right now, my focus is on helping you succeed." As James prepared for his first investor meetings, he felt more confident than he ever had in his life. He had a revolutionary product, a solid business plan, and the support of his best friend. Everything was falling into place exactly as it should. He scheduled meetings with 3 potential investors for the following month. He refined his pitch deck, practiced his presentation, and prepared for every possible question. Robert helped him anticipate challenges and develop compelling responses. "You're ready," Robert assured him the night before his first investor meeting. "You know this product better than anyone, you understand the market, and you've got the passion to make it work. Just be yourself, and they'll see what I see. That LocalLink is going to be huge." James went to bed that night feeling excited and nervous in equal measure. Tomorrow would be the beginning of LocalLink's journey from idea to reality. Tomorrow, he would start building the future he'd been dreaming about for months. He had no idea that tomorrow would also be the day he discovered that his best friend had already stolen that future from him. Chapter 2: The Betrayal. James woke up on the morning of his first investor meeting with the kind of nervous energy that comes from knowing your life is about to change. He'd been preparing for this moment for months, and everything felt perfectly aligned. His presentation was polished, his prototype was functioning flawlessly, and his business plan was comprehensive and compelling. He arrived at the offices of Meridian Ventures 30 minutes early, using the extra time to review his notes one final time and calm his nerves. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. with Sarah Martinez, a partner who specialized in early-stage tech investments. James had researched her extensively and knew she had a track record of supporting innovative apps that connected communities. At exactly 10 a.m., James was escorted into a sleek conference room where Sarah was waiting with her laptop open and a cup of coffee steaming beside her. "James, good to meet you," she said, standing to shake his hand. "I'm looking forward to hearing about LocalLink." "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, Sarah. I'm excited to share what I've been working on." James launched into his presentation with confidence, walking Sarah through the market opportunity, the technical innovation, and the business model. He demonstrated the prototype, showing how the AI recommendations worked and how businesses could manage their profiles and analytics. Sarah seemed engaged, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. But about halfway through the presentation, James noticed a change in her expression. She looked confused, then concerned, then almost uncomfortable. "James," she said, interrupting his explanation of the revenue projections, "I have to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." "Of course. What is it? Are you familiar with an app called Community Connect?" James felt his stomach drop. "No, I've never heard of it." "Why?" Sarah turned her laptop around to show him a website that made his blood run cold. There, displayed on her screen, was an app that looked almost identical to LocalLink. The interface was different, but the core functionality was the same: AI-powered recommendations connecting users with local businesses based on their preferences and location. Community Connect launched 3 weeks ago, Sarah said gently. It's already gained significant traction, and the founder has been making rounds with investors. James, what you're showing me is remarkably similar to what they're offering. James stared at the screen, his mind racing. This is impossible. I've been working on LocalLink for over a year. I've never seen this app before in my life. I believe you, Sarah said, but you have to understand my position. Community Connect has first mover advantage. They're already in market, and they've secured some impressive partnerships. Unless you can demonstrate significant differentiation or superior technology, it's going to be very difficult to compete. Who founded Community Connect? James asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Robert Chen. He's actually quite impressive, strong business background, excellent presentation skills, and he seems to really understand the market. The room started spinning. James gripped the edge of the conference table, trying to process what he was hearing. Robert Chen. His best friend, his business partner, the person he'd shared every detail of LocalLink with over the past year. James, are you all right? You look pale. I'm sorry, Sarah. I need to look into this. Can we reschedule? Of course. James, I hope you understand that I'm not trying to discourage you. Competition is normal in this space. But you'll need to find a way to differentiate your offering if you want to succeed. James barely remembered leaving the Meridian Ventures office. He drove home in a daze, his mind struggling to make sense of what he'd just learned. There had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone else had come up with a similar idea independently. But even as he tried to rationalize what he'd seen, James knew the truth. The similarities were too specific, too detailed to be coincidental. Someone had stolen his idea, and that someone was his best friend. Back in his apartment, James immediately pulled up the Community Connect website and began exploring every page, every feature, every piece of marketing copy. What he found made him feel physically sick. The app wasn't just similar to LocalLink, it was LocalLink, with minor cosmetic changes and a different name. The AI recommendation algorithm worked exactly the way James had designed it. The business dashboard included features that James had specifically developed. Even some of the marketing language echoed conversations he'd had with Robert about how to position the product. But the most damning evidence was in the About section of the website. There, Robert had written a founder's story that included details about the inspiration for the app. Details that came directly from James's original brainstorming sessions. The idea for Community Connect came to me during a morning commute, Robert had written, when I heard local business owners on the radio talking about their struggles to connect with their community. I realized that technology could bridge this gap in a meaningful way. Those were James's words, describing James's moment of inspiration, now attributed to Robert as if they were his own memories. James's hands were shaking as he continued reading. The technical specifications matched his prototype exactly. The business model was identical to what he'd outlined in his business plan. Even the revenue projections were the same numbers he'd calculated and shared with Robert during their coffee meetings. With growing horror, James realized that Robert hadn't just stolen his idea. He'd stolen his entire vision, his months of work, his carefully crafted business strategy, and even his personal story of inspiration. James grabbed his phone and called Robert immediately. Hey James, how did the investor meeting go? Robert's voice was cheerful, casual, as if nothing had happened. We need to talk. Now. Sure, what's up? You sound upset. Community Connect, Robert. We need to talk about Community Connect. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Robert spoke again, his voice had changed, cooler, more guarded. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Rob. I just spent an hour looking at your website, your app, your stolen business plan. I know what you did. Another pause. James, I think you're confused. Community Connect is my project. I've been working on it for over a year. The casual way Robert lied to his face was almost more shocking than the theft itself. This was the person who had been his best friend for 20 years, who had sat through countless brainstorming sessions, who had helped him refine every aspect of LocalLink. Your project. James's voice was rising. Rob, I shared every detail of LocalLink with you. You helped me develop the business plan. You gave me feedback on the prototype. You know exactly where this idea came from. James, I understand you're upset, but you need to be careful about making accusations. Ideas aren't owned by anyone until they're properly developed and brought to market. If we both happen to be working on similar concepts. Similar concepts? James was shouting now. Robert, you copied my algorithm. You used my marketing language. You even stole my origin story. I think you need to calm down and think about this rationally. If you believe I've infringed on your intellectual property, you're welcome to pursue legal action. But I'd advise you to be very careful about making public accusations that you can't prove. The cold, calculated way Robert was handling the conversation was like talking to a stranger. This wasn't the warm, supportive friend who had encouraged James's dreams. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been planning this betrayal for months. 20 years, Rob. 20 years of friendship, and this is how you repay me. James, I'm sorry you feel this way, but business is business. I saw an opportunity in the market, and I took it. That's what entrepreneurs do. With my idea. Using my work. Prove it, Robert said simply. Prove that the idea was yours first. Prove that I didn't develop Community Connect independently. Prove that I stole anything from you. The line went dead. Robert had hung up on him. James sat in his apartment, staring at his phone, trying to process what had just happened. His best friend, the person he trusted more than anyone in the world, had not only stolen his life's work, but was now gaslighting him about it, acting as if James was the one being unreasonable. But Robert's challenge echoed in his mind. Prove it. James realized with growing panic that proving theft would be incredibly difficult. He'd shared everything with Robert verbally, during casual conversations and brainstorming sessions. He'd been so trusting, so open, that he'd never thought to document their discussions or protect his ideas from the person he trusted most. Robert, meanwhile, had clearly been planning this for months. He'd filed patents, copyrighted materials, and created a paper trail that made it look like Community Connect was his original creation. He'd used their shared business relationships and client contacts to secure funding and partnerships. He'd even launched first, giving him the advantage of being seen as the original innovator. James spent the rest of the day researching Community Connect's launch and trying to understand the scope of Robert's betrayal. What he found was devastating. Robert had secured $2.3 million in seed funding from 3 different investors, including 2 firms that James had been planning to approach. He'd signed partnership agreements with several major local business associations. He'd even hired away 2 developers from a competing app company, using funding that should have gone to James's project. Most painfully, James discovered that Robert had been working on Community Connect for at least 6 months, based on the patent filing dates and early press coverage. That meant Robert had been stealing James's idea and developing it in secret, while continuing to act as his supportive best friend and business partner. Every encouraging word, every piece of advice, every moment of support had been a lie. Robert had been playing a long game, gathering intelligence about James's plans while secretly building his own competing version. James tried calling Robert several more times that evening, but his calls went straight to voicemail. He sent text messages that went unanswered. He even drove to Robert's apartment, but no one answered the door. The next morning, James received an email from Robert that made everything clear. James, after our conversation yesterday, I think it's best if we take some time apart to let emotions cool down. I understand you're disappointed that someone else brought a similar idea to market first, but that's the nature of entrepreneurship. I want you to know that I value our friendship and our business partnership, but I can't allow personal relationships to interfere with professional opportunities. Community Connect represents a significant investment of my time, energy, and resources, and I intend to protect it. If you choose to pursue legal action, that's your right, but I hope you'll consider the potential damage to our friendship and our shared business interests. Sullivan and Chen has been good to both of us, and I'd hate to see it suffer because of a misunderstanding. I'm willing to discuss this further when you're ready to approach it rationally and professionally. Best regards, Robert. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation. Robert was positioning himself as the reasonable party while painting James as emotional and irrational. He was threatening their shared business while pretending to be concerned about their friendship. He was even suggesting that James's pursuit of justice would be the thing that damaged their relationship, not Robert's theft and betrayal. James realized that he was dealing with someone far more calculating and ruthless than he'd ever imagined. The Robert he thought he knew, the loyal friend, the supportive partner, had never really existed. In his place was a manipulator who had spent months planning the perfect theft. But Robert had made one crucial mistake in his calculation. He'd assumed that James would be too hurt, too confused, or too afraid of damaging their friendship to fight back effectively. He'd counted on James being the same trusting, generous person who had shared his dreams so openly. Robert was about to learn that betrayal could transform even the most loyal friend into a formidable enemy. And James had advantages that Robert didn't know about: technical skills, detailed documentation, and most importantly, intimate knowledge of every weakness, every secret, and every corner Robert had cut to build his success. James had spent 20 years learning everything there was to know about Robert Chen. Now he was going to use that knowledge to destroy him. The war between former best friends was about to begin, and James intended to win. Chapter 3: Gathering Intelligence. The first thing James did was document everything. If Robert wanted proof, James would give him proof. More proof than Robert could possibly have anticipated. James had always been meticulous about his work, a habit that had served him well as a programmer and would now serve him even better as someone seeking justice. While he'd shared his ideas with Robert verbally, he'd also been documenting his progress digitally in ways that Robert probably didn't realize. James started with his development logs. Every programmer worth their salt keeps detailed records of their work: commit messages in version control systems, timestamps on file modifications, notes about feature implementations. James's LocalLink repository contained months of evidence showing the evolution of his idea from concept to working prototype. The timestamps were damning. James's first commit to the LocalLink repository was dated 14 months ago, with the comment, "Initial concept for local business recommendation engine." Robert's earliest patent filing for Community Connect was dated only 8 months ago, 6 months after James had already begun development. But James knew that timestamps could be manipulated, and Robert's lawyers would probably argue that the evidence was inconclusive. He needed something more concrete, more undeniable. That's when James remembered the shared cloud storage account that he and Robert used for their marketing consultancy. They'd been storing client files, project documents, and business records in the same system for years. James had administrative access to the entire account, including the ability to see detailed access logs and file histories. What James found in those logs was a smoking gun. Starting 6 months ago, Robert had been accessing and downloading files from James's personal project folder. The folder where James had been storing his LocalLink business plans, market research, and technical specifications. The access logs showed that Robert had downloaded every single document related to LocalLink, often within hours of James uploading them. Even more damning, the logs showed that Robert had been accessing these files during times when he was supposed to be working on other projects. He'd been systematically stealing James's work while pretending to be his supportive business partner. James exported the entire access log and saved it to multiple secure locations. This was evidence that Robert couldn't explain away or manipulate. It showed premeditation, systematic theft, and a clear timeline that proved James's work predated Robert's claims. But James wasn't done gathering evidence. He remembered that their marketing consultancy used a project management system that tracked all communications, aberrative work. If Robert had been using company resources to develop Community Connect, there would be traces in the system. James spent hours combing through the project management logs, and what he found exceeded his worst expectations. Robert hadn't just stolen James's idea. He'd been using company time, company resources, and company contacts to develop his competing product. The logs showed that Robert had been making calls to potential investors during work hours, using the company phone system. He'd been sending emails about Community Connect from his company email address. He'd even been using the company's graphic design software to create marketing materials for his stolen app. Most shocking of all, James discovered that Robert had been reaching out to their existing clients, trying to recruit them as early adopters for Community Connect. He'd been leveraging relationships that he and James had built together to benefit his own competing venture. This wasn't just intellectual property theft. It was a violation of their partnership agreement, a breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially criminal misuse of company resources. James documented everything, creating a comprehensive timeline that showed exactly how Robert had stolen his idea, when he'd done it, and what resources he'd used. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But James knew that legal action would be slow, expensive, and uncertain. Even with overwhelming evidence, patent disputes could take years to resolve, and by then, Robert's head start would be insurmountable. James needed a faster, more decisive way to reclaim what was rightfully his. That's when James remembered something Robert had told him years ago, during a conversation about business ethics and competitive strategy. The thing about building a business on lies, Robert had said, is that you have to keep lying to maintain it. And eventually, the lies catch up with you. Robert had been talking about a competitor at the time, but his words now seemed prophetic. Community Connect was built on lies. Lies about its origin, lies about its development, lies about Robert's role in creating it. And James was going to make sure those lies caught up with Robert in the most public and devastating way possible. James began researching Robert's public claims about Community Connect, looking for inconsistencies and vulnerabilities. What he found was a web of deception that went far beyond just stealing James's idea. In interviews with tech blogs, Robert had claimed to have a computer science background that he didn't actually possess. He'd exaggerated his role in several successful marketing campaigns, taking credit for work that James had actually done. He'd even fabricated details about his early life and career to make his founder's story more compelling. Robert had always been a gifted storyteller, but James now realized that this gift had been used to construct an elaborate fiction about his qualifications and achievements. Community Connect wasn't just built on stolen intellectual property. It was built on a foundation of lies about Robert's capabilities and experience. James also discovered that Robert had been less than honest with his investors. The financial projections he'd shared were overly optimistic, based on market research that James had conducted, but that Robert was presenting as his own work. The technical specifications he'd promised were beyond Robert's actual capabilities. He'd been planning to hire developers to build features that he didn't understand himself. Most damaging of all, James found evidence that Robert had been inflating Community Connect's early user numbers and engagement metrics. The significant traction that investors were excited about was largely fictional, created through fake accounts and manipulated data. James realized that Robert's entire business was a house of cards, held together by lies, stolen work, and fraudulent claims. All James had to do was pull the right card, and the whole structure would collapse. But James wanted to be strategic about his approach. He didn't just want to expose Robert's lies. He wanted to destroy his credibility so completely that he'd never be able to rebuild it. He wanted to make sure that everyone who had believed in Robert, invested in him, or partnered with him would know exactly what kind of person they'd been dealing with. James began reaching out to his own network of contacts in the tech industry. He'd been building relationships with developers, investors, and entrepreneurs for years, and many of them were shocked to learn about Robert's theft. "I can't believe Robert would do something like this," said Maria Santos, a venture capitalist who had known both James and Robert for several years. "I've always thought of him as one of the good guys in this industry." "That's what I thought too," James replied. "But I have documentation showing that he's been systematically stealing my work for months while pretending to be my friend and business partner. What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about Robert Chen and Community Connect." James began crafting a comprehensive exposé that would reveal every aspect of Robert's deception. He would present the evidence methodically, building an undeniable case that would destroy Robert's credibility and reputation. But James also knew that he needed to be careful about how he presented his case. If he came across as bitter or vindictive, people might dismiss his claims as the complaints of a sore loser. He needed to present the facts objectively, letting the evidence speak for itself. James spent days crafting his exposé, checking every fact, verifying every claim, and ensuring that his presentation was professional and compelling. He created a website that laid out the entire timeline of Robert's theft, complete with screenshots, documents, and irrefutable evidence. He also prepared a comprehensive media kit that he could send to tech journalists, industry publications, and influential bloggers. The story had all the elements that made for compelling coverage: friendship betrayal, corporate theft, startup drama, and a David versus Goliath narrative that would resonate with readers. But before James went public with his accusations, he decided to give Robert one final chance to make things right. He sent a carefully worded email that laid out exactly what he knew and what he was prepared to do about it. "Robert, I've spent the past week investigating Community Connect and your claims about its development. What I've found is deeply disturbing and completely unacceptable. I have documented evidence showing that you systematically stole my LocalLink concept, business plan, and technical specifications. I have access logs proving that you downloaded my proprietary files without permission. I have records showing that you used company resources to develop your competing product while violating our partnership agreement. I also have evidence that you've made false claims to investors about your background, your role in developing the technology, and the app's performance metrics. You have 48 hours to respond to this email with a plan for making this situation right. If I don't hear from you, or if your response is inadequate, I will be going public with all of this information. I'm not interested in destroying our friendship or your career, but I will not allow you to profit from stolen work while destroying my own opportunities in the process. The choice is yours. James. James sent the email and waited. He knew that Robert would probably ignore it or respond with more lies and manipulation, but he wanted to be able to say that he'd given his former friend a chance to do the right thing. Robert's response came 18 hours later. James, I'm disappointed that you've chosen to pursue this course of action, but I'm not surprised. You've always had trouble accepting that other people might be more successful than you. I've reviewed your claims with my legal team, and they've advised me that you have no case. Ideas cannot be copyrighted, and you have no proof that I accessed your files inappropriately or used company resources improperly. If you choose to make public accusations against me or Community Connect, you will be hearing from my lawyers. I will pursue defamation charges to the fullest extent of the law, and I will seek damages for any harm you cause to my business or reputation. I suggest you focus on your own projects instead of trying to tear down mine. Robert. The response was exactly what James had expected: denial, threats, and an attempt to turn the situation around on him. Robert was clearly confident that his legal protections were solid and that James wouldn't be able to prove his case. Robert was about to learn just how wrong he was. James had given his former best friend a chance to make things right, and Robert had chosen to double down on his lies and theft. Now James was going to show him what happened when you betrayed someone who had spent 20 years learning all your weaknesses. The gloves were coming off, and James intended to fight dirty. Chapter 4: The Counterattack. James launched his counterattack on a Tuesday morning at exactly 9 a.m. Pacific Time, the moment when the tech industry would be checking their emails and social media feeds with their morning coffee. He'd spent the weekend finalizing his strategy, and it was comprehensive, methodical, and designed to cause maximum damage to Robert's credibility and business prospects. James wasn't just going to expose Robert's theft. He was going to systematically dismantle every lie, every exaggeration, and every fraudulent claim that Robert had built his success on. The first salvo was a detailed blog post on Medium titled, "How My Best Friend of 20 Years Stole My Startup and What I'm Doing About It." James had crafted the post carefully, presenting the facts in a clear, chronological narrative that was both compelling and damning. The post began with the story of their friendship, establishing the deep trust and collaboration that had existed between them. James included photos from their childhood, their college graduation, and the early days of their marketing consultancy. He wanted readers to understand the magnitude of the betrayal. This wasn't just business theft, it was the destruction of a lifelong bond. Then James methodically laid out the evidence. He included screenshots of the access logs showing Robert downloading his files. He presented side-by-side comparisons of his LocalLink documentation and Robert's Community Connect materials, highlighting identical language and concepts. He provided timestamps proving that his work predated Robert's claims by months. But the most devastating section of the post focused on Robert's lies to investors and the media. James had done his homework, fact-checking every claim Robert had made about his background, his experience, and Community Connect's performance. The discrepancies were staggering. Robert had claimed to have a computer science degree from Stanford. He actually had a marketing degree from a state school. He'd said he'd led the development of several successful apps. He'd actually been a junior marketing coordinator on those projects. He'd boasted about Community Connect's explosive user growth. The actual numbers were a fraction of what he'd claimed. James presented each lie with documentation, creating an undeniable pattern of deception that went far beyond just stealing the LocalLink concept. Robert hadn't just stolen James's idea. He'd built his entire professional persona on fabrications and exaggerations. The blog post went viral within hours. James had strategically shared it with key influencers in the tech community, and they began amplifying it across their networks. The story had everything that made for compelling social media content: betrayal, fraud, startup drama, and clear evidence of wrongdoing. But the blog post was just the beginning. James had prepared a multi-pronged attack designed to hit Robert from every possible angle. While the blog post was spreading across social media, James was simultaneously reaching out to tech journalists at major publications. He'd prepared a comprehensive media kit with all his evidence, and he was offering exclusive interviews to reporters who were interested in covering the story. The first major article appeared on TechCrunch 6 hours after James's blog post went live. The headline read, "Startup founder accused of stealing best friend's app idea, lying to investors." The article was thorough and damaging, presenting James's evidence while also reaching out to Robert for comment. Robert's response to TechCrunch was predictably defensive. "These accusations are completely false and appear to be motivated by jealousy and spite. Mr. Sullivan is upset that someone else brought a similar idea to market first, and he's trying to damage my reputation rather than compete fairly in the marketplace." But Robert's denial only made things worse. Other tech publications picked up the story, and each one dug deeper into the evidence James had provided. By the end of the day, articles about the scandal had appeared in Wired, The Verge, and Ars Technica. The coverage was uniformly negative for Robert. Journalists were particularly critical of his lies about his educational background and professional experience. "If Chen was willing to lie about his Stanford degree," wrote one reporter, "what else has he been dishonest about?" James's second line of attack targeted Robert's investors directly. He'd researched each of the firms that had funded Community Connect, and he sent them detailed packets of evidence showing Robert's theft and deception. The response was swift and decisive. By Wednesday afternoon, 2 of Robert's 3 major investors had announced they were conducting thorough reviews of their investments in Community Connect. By Thursday morning, the largest investor, Meridian Ventures, the same firm where James had discovered Robert's theft, had publicly withdrawn their funding. "After reviewing new information that has come to light," Meridian's statement read, "we have determined that our investment in Community Connect was based on materially false representations. We are immediately withdrawing our funding and pursuing all available legal remedies." The other investors quickly followed suit. Within 48 hours of James's blog post going live, Robert had lost over $2 million in funding and was facing potential lawsuits from the firms he'd deceived. But James wasn't done. His third line of attack targeted Robert's business partnerships and client relationships. James had identified every company that had signed partnership agreements with Community Connect, and he reached out to each of them with evidence of Robert's deception. Many of these companies had existing relationships with Sullivan and Chen marketing, which gave James credibility and access that Robert couldn't counter. "I thought you should know what kind of person you're partnering with," James told the CEO of LocalBiz Network, one of Community Connect's key partners. "Robert Chen has built his entire business on stolen intellectual property and fraudulent claims." The CEO was shocked by the evidence James presented. "We had no idea about any of this. Robert seemed so professional and knowledgeable. That's because he was using my knowledge and my work to appear credible. Everything impressive about Community Connect came from my original LocalLink concept." Within days, Community Connect began losing partnerships as quickly as it had gained them. Companies didn't want to be associated with fraud and theft, especially when the evidence was so clear and public. James's fourth and most personal line of attack targeted Robert's reputation within their shared professional network. James had spent years building relationships with clients, vendors, and industry contacts through their marketing consultancy. Many of these people had worked with both James and Robert, and they were shocked to learn about Robert's betrayal. "I can't believe Robert would do something like this," said Tom Wilson, a longtime client who had become a friend over the years. "I've always thought of him as honest and trustworthy." "So did I," James replied. "But the evidence is undeniable. Robert has been lying to everyone, including me, for months." Word spread quickly through their professional network. Clients began questioning whether they could trust Robert with their business. Vendors started demanding payment up front instead of extending credit. Industry contacts began distancing themselves from someone who was now seen as unethical and untrustworthy. The damage to Robert's reputation was swift and comprehensive. In the span of a week, he'd gone from being seen as a rising star in the tech industry to being viewed as a cautionary tale about startup fraud. But James's most devastating attack was yet to come. James had discovered that Robert had been inflating Community Connect's user numbers and engagement metrics, presenting false data to investors and partners. This wasn't just unethical. It was securities fraud, a federal crime that could result in serious prison time. James had documented evidence of the fraudulent metrics, including screenshots of the real analytics dashboard compared to the inflated numbers Robert had been reporting. He'd also identified the methods Robert had used to create fake user accounts and generate artificial engagement. James compiled all of this evidence into a comprehensive report and submitted it to the Securities and Exchange Commission's whistleblower program. He also sent copies to the FBI's white-collar crime division and the state attorney general's office. Mr. Chen has been systematically defrauding investors by presenting false performance metrics for his company, James wrote in his complaint. This appears to constitute securities fraud under federal law, and I believe a criminal investigation is warranted. The government agencies moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, Robert received notice that he was under investigation for securities fraud. Federal agents seized his computers and financial records. His bank accounts were frozen pending the outcome of the investigation. The news of the criminal investigation was the final nail in Community Connect's coffin. The few remaining investors and partners immediately severed their relationships with the company. The app was removed from both the Apple App Store and Google Play Store pending the resolution of the intellectual property dispute. Robert's employees began looking for new jobs as it became clear that the company was finished. But James wasn't satisfied with just destroying Community Connect. He wanted to make sure that Robert could never rebuild his career on lies and stolen work. James had been documenting every false claim Robert had ever made, every exaggeration, every fabrication that had helped him build his professional reputation. He created a comprehensive database of Robert's lies, complete with evidence and documentation. Then James did something that would ensure Robert's dishonesty followed him for the rest of his career. He created a website called robertchenfacts.com that laid out every lie Robert had ever told, every theft he'd committed, and every person he'd deceived. The website was professional, well-documented, and search engine optimized. Anyone who Googled Robert's name would find it on the first page of results. Potential employers, investors, or business partners would immediately see the truth about Robert's character and history. Robert Chen has built his career on lies, theft, and deception, the website's homepage read. Before you do business with him, you should know the facts. The website included testimonials from Robert's victims, documentation of his lies, and a timeline of his fraudulent activities. It was comprehensive, damning, and permanent. James also made sure that Robert's deception was documented in industry databases and professional networks. He submitted detailed reports to business rating agencies, professional associations, and industry watchdog groups. Robert's name would be permanently associated with fraud and theft in every relevant database. The cumulative effect of James's counterattack was devastating and complete. In the span of 3 weeks, Robert had lost his funding, his partnerships, his employees, his reputation, and his freedom. He was facing federal criminal charges, multiple civil lawsuits, and the complete destruction of his professional credibility. Community Connect was dead. Robert's career was over. And everyone in the tech industry knew exactly why. But James wasn't done yet. He had one final move that would ensure Robert never forgot the consequences of betraying someone who had trusted him completely. James had been quietly working on his own version of LocalLink throughout Robert's downfall. While Robert was dealing with investigations and lawsuits, James was building the app he'd originally envisioned, incorporating all the improvements and refinements he'd developed over the past year. 3 months after Robert's world collapsed, James launched LocalLink with a marketing campaign that told the complete story of its development, including Robert's theft and the legal battle that followed. LocalLink, the app that survived betrayal, became a powerful marketing narrative that resonated with users who appreciated James's honesty and resilience. The app launched to widespread media coverage and strong user adoption. Within 6 months, LocalLink had achieved everything that Robert had falsely claimed for Community Connect: real user growth, genuine partnerships, and legitimate investor interest. James had not only reclaimed his stolen idea, but had built it into the success he'd always envisioned. The final irony was that LocalLink's success was partly due to the publicity generated by Robert's theft. The story of betrayal and redemption had made James a sympathetic figure in the tech community, and many people downloaded the app specifically to support him. Robert, meanwhile, was facing a federal trial for securities fraud. His legal bills had consumed what little money he had left, and he was working as a junior marketing coordinator at a small firm. The same level job he'd held before meeting James and stealing his way to temporary success. The friendship that had lasted 20 years was over, destroyed by Robert's greed and dishonesty. But James had learned something valuable from the experience. Sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the deepest betrayals, and when that happens, the only response is to fight back with everything you have. James had fought back, and he had won completely. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. 6 months after Robert's world collapsed, James received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but when he answered, he immediately recognized the voice on the other end, though it sounded different now, smaller and more defeated than he remembered. "James, it's Robert. Please don't hang up." James's first instinct was to end the call immediately. He'd said everything he needed to say to Robert, and he had no interest in hearing excuses or apologies. But something in Robert's tone made him pause. "What do you want, Robert?" "I want to talk. In person. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for 30 minutes of your time." "Why would I give you 30 seconds, let alone 30 minutes?" "Because I have information you need to know. About the investigation, about what really happened, about things that are bigger than just what I did to you." James was intrigued despite himself. The federal investigation into Robert's securities fraud had been ongoing for months, but James hadn't heard any updates recently. "What kind of information?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at Riverside Park, by the old playground where we used to hang out as kids. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you don't show up, I'll understand." The line went dead. James stared at his phone, wondering what Robert could possibly have to say that would be worth hearing. The federal prosecutors had already built a solid case against Robert based on the evidence James had provided. Community Connect was dead, Robert's reputation was destroyed, and LocalLink was thriving. What more could there be? But James's curiosity got the better of him. The next afternoon, he found himself walking through Riverside Park toward the playground where he and Robert had spent countless hours as children. The irony of the location wasn't lost on him. Returning to the place where their friendship had been strongest to have what would likely be their final conversation. Robert was already there, sitting on one of the old swings they'd used 20 years earlier. He looked terrible, thinner than James remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and an overall appearance of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. The confident, charismatic person who had stolen James's idea was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and defeated. "Thank you for coming," Robert said as James approached. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. This better be worth my time." Robert gestured to the swing next to him. "Sit with me. Like old times." "There are no old times, Robert. You destroyed that when you decided to steal from me." "I know. And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." James remained standing. "You said you had information for me. What is it?" Robert took a deep breath. "The investigation has expanded. It's not just about Community Connect anymore. The FBI has been looking into other cases, other things I've done." "What other things?" "Remember the Hartwell campaign? The one that made our reputation as a consultancy?" James remembered it well. 3 years earlier, they'd landed a major contract with Hartwell Industries to rebrand their company and launch a new product line. The campaign had been incredibly successful and had established Sullivan and Chen as a serious player in the marketing world. "What about it?" "The strategy, the creative concepts, the execution plan, none of it was mine. I stole it from a freelancer named Sarah Kim. She'd pitched the exact same ideas to Hartwell 6 months earlier, but they'd rejected her proposal because she was a solo practitioner and they wanted an established firm." James felt sick. "You stole her work and presented it as ours?" "I found out about her pitch through a contact at Hartwell. I got copies of her proposal and basically recreated it under our company name. Sarah never knew what happened. She just thought Hartwell had decided to go in a different direction." "Jesus, Robert. How many people have you stolen from?" "More than I want to admit. The Morrison account, the TechStart launch, the Riverside Mall renovation. All of those were based on work I'd stolen from other people. I've been doing it for years, James. Long before Community Connect." James sat down heavily on the swing next to Robert, trying to process what he was hearing. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the FBI found out. They've been interviewing Sarah Kim and the other people I stole from. They're building a case for a pattern of intellectual property theft and fraud that goes back years. And James, they want to know if you were involved." The words hit James like a physical blow. What do you mean if I was involved? Our company name is on all those stolen campaigns. Legally, we were partners in everything Sullivan and Chen did. The prosecutors are trying to determine if you knew about the theft or if you were a victim too. James felt the world spinning around him. Are you telling me that I could be charged as an accomplice to your crimes? It's possible. The prosecutors are still investigating, but they've asked me specifically about your knowledge of my methods and your involvement in developing the stolen campaigns. But I didn't know. I had no idea you were stealing other people's work. I know that, and I've told them that. But James, you have to understand, from the outside it looks suspicious. You were my business partner, you benefited from the success of those campaigns, and you have the technical skills to have helped with the theft. James stood up abruptly, pacing away from the swings. This is insane. I'm the one who exposed you. I'm the one who provided evidence to the FBI, which could be seen as you trying to distance yourself from crimes you were involved in. James, I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm telling you how it might look to prosecutors who don't know you. What do you want from me, Robert? Why are you telling me this? Robert stood up and walked over to where James was pacing. Because I want to make this right. I've already told the prosecutors that you had no knowledge of my theft, that you were as much a victim as anyone else. But they want corroboration. What kind of corroboration? They want me to wear a wire, to record conversations with people who might have been involved or who might have information about the thefts. They think some of our clients might have known they were getting stolen work and chose to look the other way. James stared at his former best friend. And you want me to help you with that? I want you to know what's happening so you can protect yourself. James, if this investigation expands, it could destroy everything you've built with LocalLink. Even if you're completely innocent, the association with fraud could kill your app and your reputation. So what are you suggesting? Help me give the prosecutors what they want. Help me expose the clients who knew they were getting stolen work. Help me make sure the investigation focuses on the real criminals instead of expanding to include innocent people like you. James felt a surge of anger. Innocent people like me? Robert, I am innocent. I never stole anything, I never defrauded anyone, and I never knowingly benefited from your crimes. I know that, but the prosecutors don't know you like I do. They see a business partner who profited from fraudulent campaigns, and they want to make sure you weren't involved. This is unbelievable. First you steal my life's work, and now you're telling me I might be charged as your accomplice? James, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to make sure you don't get dragged down with me. By asking me to help you with an FBI investigation? By asking me to wear a wire and spy on our former clients? By asking you to help me tell the truth? These clients knew James. Hartwell knew they were getting Sarah Kim's stolen work. Morrison Industries knew their campaign was plagiarized. They all knew, and they chose to work with us anyway because we were cheaper than hiring the original creators. James stopped pacing and looked at Robert carefully. How do you know they knew? Because they told me. Not directly, but in ways that made it clear they understood what was happening. Hartwell's marketing director even joked about how our proposal was remarkably similar to something they'd seen before. Morrison's CEO asked if we were sure our ideas were original before signing the contract. And you think the FBI wants to prosecute them too? I think the FBI wants to prosecute everyone involved in a systematic pattern of intellectual property theft and fraud. And I think they're willing to offer deals to people who cooperate with their investigation. James realized what Robert was really asking. You want me to help you flip on our clients in exchange for immunity. I want us both to tell the truth about what happened and who was involved. James, this is bigger than just what I did to you. This is about a whole network of people who have been stealing ideas and defrauding creators for years. James walked back to the swings and sat down, trying to process everything Robert had told him. The idea that he could be charged as an accomplice to crimes he'd never committed was terrifying. But the idea of cooperating with Robert, of helping the person who had betrayed him so completely, was almost equally disturbing. What exactly are you asking me to do? Meet with the prosecutors. Tell them everything you know about our client relationships and business practices. Help them understand that you were never involved in the theft and that you can provide information about clients who might have been complicit. And in exchange? In exchange, you get immunity from prosecution and protection from any civil lawsuits that might come out of this investigation. James, if this thing explodes the way I think it will, there are going to be dozens of victims seeking damages. You don't want to be named as a defendant in those cases. James thought about LocalLink, about the success he'd finally achieved after Robert's betrayal. The idea that it could all be destroyed by association with crimes he'd never committed was unbearable. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just another manipulation? Robert pulled out his phone and showed James a series of text messages from a number identified as Agent Martinez, FBI. Agent Martinez has been my contact throughout the investigation. She's the one who told me about the expanded scope and the questions about your involvement. James, I'm not trying to manipulate you. I'm trying to save both of us from something that's much bigger than either of us realized. James read through the messages, which seemed to confirm what Robert was saying. The investigation had indeed expanded, and there were questions about James's knowledge and involvement. If I agree to cooperate, what happens to you? I'm probably going to prison. The securities fraud charges alone carry a potential sentence of 10 to 15 years. But if I cooperate fully, if I help them build cases against the other people involved, I might get a reduced sentence. And you're willing to do that? James, I've lost everything. My company, my reputation, my career, my freedom. It's all gone. The only thing I have left is the chance to make some of this right, to help the people I've hurt get justice. James looked at his former best friend, trying to determine if this was genuine remorse or just another calculated move. Why should I trust you? After everything you've done, why should I believe that you're trying to help me? Because I owe you that much. Because our friendship meant something to me, even if I destroyed it. Because I know that none of this is your fault, and I don't want you to pay for my crimes. Robert's voice broke slightly as he spoke, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, James saw genuine emotion from him. Not the calculated manipulation he'd become accustomed to, but real regret and pain. I need time to think about this, James said finally. I understand. But James, don't take too long. Agent Martinez wants to meet with you next week. If you're going to cooperate, it needs to happen soon. James stood up and started walking away, then turned back. Robert, can I ask you something? Anything. When did it start? When did you first decide to steal someone else's work? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I think it started in college. I was struggling with a marketing project, and I found a paper online that was exactly what I needed. I changed a few words and submitted it as my own work. It was so easy, and the professor praised it so highly, that I started looking for other opportunities to borrow ideas. And it just escalated from there. It became a habit. Whenever I was stuck or under pressure, I'd look for existing work that I could adapt. It was always supposed to be temporary, just until I could develop my own ideas. But the stolen work was always better than anything I could create myself. What about our friendship? Was any of that real? All of it was real, James. My feelings for you, my respect for your abilities, my gratitude for your friendship. None of that was fake. That's what makes this so horrible. I betrayed the person who meant the most to me. Then why did you do it? Why did you steal LocalLink when you knew how much it meant to me? Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. Because I was jealous. Because you were always the creative one, the one with the real ideas, and I was just the guy who was good at selling other people's work. When you came up with LocalLink, I realized it was the kind of breakthrough idea that I would never be able to create myself. And I wanted it so badly that I convinced myself I deserved it. You convinced yourself you deserved to steal my life's work? I convinced myself that I could execute it better than you could. That I had the business skills and connections to make it successful in ways that you couldn't. I told myself that I was actually helping the idea reach its full potential. James shook his head in disgust. That's the most twisted rationalization I've ever heard. I know how sick it sounds. But James, when you're living a lie for so long, you become really good at lying to yourself too. James walked away without another word. He had a lot to think about, and he needed to make a decision that would affect the rest of his life. 3 days later, James called Agent Martinez and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Chapter 6: Justice and Redemption. The FBI field office in downtown Seattle was nothing like the sterile, high-tech facility James had imagined from watching movies and TV shows. Instead, it was a surprisingly ordinary government building with fluorescent lighting, beige walls, and the kind of institutional furniture that could be found in any office complex. Agent Maria Martinez was equally different from James's expectations. She was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put James at ease. She'd been investigating white-collar crime for over 15 years, and she had the kind of calm competence that came from having seen every type of fraud and deception imaginable. "Mr. Sullivan, thank you for coming in," Agent Martinez said as she led James to a small conference room. "I know this situation is complicated for you, given your personal relationship with Mr. Chen." "Former relationship," James corrected. "Robert destroyed our friendship when he decided to steal from me." "I understand. And I want you to know that we've already determined that you had no knowledge of Mr. Chen's fraudulent activities. Your cooperation today is about helping us understand the full scope of his crimes and identifying other potential victims and perpetrators." James felt a wave of relief wash over him. "So I'm not under investigation?" "Not as a suspect, no. You're here as a witness and a victim. Mr. Chen stole your intellectual property and used your business partnership to legitimize his fraudulent activities. We want to make sure he faces appropriate consequences for those crimes." Agent Martinez opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across the table. "What we've discovered is that Mr. Chen's theft of your LocalLink concept was just the most recent example of a pattern of behavior that goes back several years. He's been systematically stealing ideas from freelancers, small agencies, and individual creators, then presenting that work as his own through your joint consultancy." James looked at the documents, which included copies of original proposals, emails, and contracts that showed the scope of Robert's deception. "How many people did he steal from?" "We've identified at least 12 separate instances of intellectual property theft over the past 4 years. The total value of the stolen work is estimated at over $3 million. $3 million? James was stunned. "I had no idea it was that extensive." Most of the victims didn't realize they'd been stolen from. They thought their ideas had been rejected, not that they'd been taken and repackaged by someone else. It was only when we started investigating Mr. Chen's activities that we were able to connect the dots. Agent Martinez showed James a timeline that laid out Robert's crimes in chronological order. The pattern was clear and systematic. Robert would identify promising ideas from freelancers or small agencies, steal their concepts, and then present them to larger clients through Sullivan and Chen marketing. The clients were getting high-quality work at below-market prices, Agent Martinez explained. Some of them suspected that something wasn't quite right, but they chose not to ask too many questions because the results were so good. "Are you going to prosecute the clients too?" "That depends on what we can prove about their knowledge and intent. Some of them clearly knew they were getting stolen work and chose to look the other way. Others may have been genuinely unaware of the fraud." Agent Martinez pulled out a recording device and placed it on the table. "This is where we need your help. We want you to have conversations with some of these clients, conversations that we can record, to determine their level of knowledge and complicity." James stared at the device. "You want me to wear a wire?" "We want you to help us gather evidence about who knew what and when they knew it. Mr. Chen has already agreed to cooperate, but we need corroboration from someone who is involved in the business relationships." "What would I have to do?" "Contact former clients and have conversations about your past work together. Ask questions about their satisfaction with the campaigns, their knowledge of the creative process, their understanding of where the ideas came from. Let them talk and see what they reveal." James thought about the clients he'd worked with over the years, people he'd considered friends and partners. The idea of secretly recording them felt like a betrayal, even if they might have been complicit in Robert's crimes. "What happens if I refuse to cooperate?" "Nothing happens to you legally. As I said, you're not under investigation. But Mr. Chen's cooperation agreement is contingent on providing substantial assistance to our investigation. If we can't build strong cases against the other people involved, his sentence will be much harsher." James realized that Agent Martinez was giving him a choice, but it wasn't really a choice at all. If he wanted to see Robert face appropriate consequences for his crimes, he needed to help the FBI build their case. What kind of sentence is Robert looking at? Without cooperation, he's facing 15 to 20 years for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. With full cooperation and substantial assistance, that could be reduced to 5 to 8 years. And the other people involved? That depends on their level of culpability. Clients who knowingly purchase stolen work could face civil penalties and possible criminal charges. The freelancers and agencies who were stolen from will likely pursue civil lawsuits for damages. James thought about Sarah Kim and the other victims whose work had been stolen. They deserved justice, and they deserved compensation for what had been taken from them. If I cooperate, what protections do I have? full immunity from any criminal charges related to Mr. Chen's activities, protection from civil liability in any lawsuits that arise from the investigation, and witness protection if any of the subjects of the investigation pose a threat to your safety. Agent Martinez slid a cooperation agreement across the table. Take your time reading this. If you have questions, you can consult with an attorney before signing. James read through the agreement carefully. It was comprehensive and seemed to provide the protections Agent Martinez had described. More importantly, it would help ensure that Robert's victims received justice and that other potential perpetrators were held accountable. "I'll do it," James said, signing the agreement. "But I want to make sure that the people Robert stole from get compensation for their losses. That's part of our goal. We're working with the victims to help them pursue civil remedies, and any criminal restitution will be distributed to them as well." Over the next 3 months, James worked with the FBI to gather evidence against Robert's co-conspirators. He had recorded conversations with 6 former clients, and the results were damning. 3 of the clients clearly knew they were getting stolen work. Hartwell Industries' marketing director admitted that he'd recognized Sarah Kim's proposal and had chosen to work with Sullivan and Chen because they were offering the same ideas at a lower price. Morrison Industries' CEO acknowledged that he'd suspected their campaign was borrowed from somewhere else but hadn't cared as long as it was effective. The other 3 clients appeared to be genuinely unaware of the fraud, though they admitted they should have asked more questions about the unusually high quality of work they were receiving at below-market prices. The evidence James helped gather led to criminal charges against 2 clients and civil penalties against several others. More importantly, it provided the foundation for successful civil lawsuits by Robert's victims. Sarah Kim, the freelancer whose work had been stolen for the Hartwell campaign, received a settlement of $400,000 from Hartwell Industries and an additional $150,000 from Robert's personal assets. The other victims received similar compensation, totaling over $2 million in damages. Robert's cooperation with the investigation ultimately resulted in a sentence of 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. He was also ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution to his victims and was permanently barred from working in marketing or advertising. But for James, the most satisfying outcome wasn't Robert's punishment. It was the success of LocalLink and the vindication of his original vision. The publicity surrounding the investigation had actually helped LocalLink gain users and investors. People were drawn to the story of an entrepreneur who had overcome betrayal and fraud to build something genuine and valuable. The app's user base grew to over 500,000 people within a year of launch, and James secured $5 million in series of funding from investors who believed in both his technology and his integrity. More importantly, LocalLink was actually working the way James had envisioned. Small businesses were connecting with their communities in meaningful ways. Users were discovering local gems they never would have found otherwise. The app was strengthening communities and supporting local economies exactly as James had hoped. James also used his platform to advocate for stronger protections for intellectual property and better support for victims of business fraud. He testified before Congress about the need for updated laws to address modern forms of theft and deception. He established a foundation that provided legal assistance to freelancers and small agencies who had been victims of intellectual property theft. "What happened to me was devastating," James said during his congressional testimony, but it was also a wake-up call about how easy it is for unscrupulous people to steal ideas and destroy lives. We need better laws, better enforcement, and better support for victims. The foundation James established helped dozens of creators recover stolen work and receive compensation for their losses. It also provided education about intellectual property protection and business fraud prevention. 2 years after Robert's sentencing, James received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from Robert, writing from federal prison. "James, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't want to read this letter. But I want you to know that I've been following LocalLink's success from prison, and I'm genuinely happy for you. I know that probably sounds hollow coming from me, but it's true. Seeing what you've built, seeing how you've turned your original vision into something that's actually helping people and communities. It's what LocalLink was always meant to be. I'm sorry I tried to steal that from you, and I'm glad you were able to reclaim it and make it even better than we originally imagined. I've been participating in a program here that helps inmates understand the impact of their crimes on victims. It's been painful but necessary work. I'm finally beginning to understand the full scope of what I did. Not just to you, but to Sarah Kim and all the other people whose work I stole over the years. I know I can't undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know that I'm trying to make amends in whatever small ways I can. I've been working with the prison's legal aid program to help other inmates who have been victims of fraud. I've also been writing a book about my experiences, with all proceeds going to your foundation to help other victims of intellectual property theft. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for a response to this letter. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I destroyed when I betrayed our friendship, and I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I did to you and to all the other people I hurt. I hope you're happy, James. I hope LocalLink continues to grow and succeed. And I hope that someday, when enough time has passed, you might be able to think of our childhood friendship without it being completely overshadowed by what I did to destroy it. Your former friend, Robert. James read the letter twice, then set it aside. He felt a complex mix of emotions: anger at Robert's betrayal, sadness for their lost friendship, and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. He didn't respond to the letter, but he didn't throw it away either. He filed it in a folder with other documents from the investigation, a reminder of how far he'd come and how much he'd overcome. 3 years after Robert's sentencing, LocalLink was acquired by a major tech company for $85 million. James stayed on as CEO of the LocalLink division and used his newfound wealth to expand his foundation's work and invest in other entrepreneurs who were building ethical, community-focused businesses. He also started speaking at business schools and entrepreneurship conferences about the importance of integrity in business and the long-term costs of unethical behavior. Success built on lies and theft is not real success, James would tell his audiences. It's a house of cards that will eventually collapse, and when it does, it will destroy not just your business but your relationships, your reputation, and your sense of self-worth. James's story became a case study in business ethics courses and a cautionary tale about the importance of protecting intellectual property. But it was also a story of resilience, redemption, and the power of doing the right thing even when it's difficult. 5 years after Robert's betrayal, James was invited to speak at a conference on business ethics. During the Q&A session, a young entrepreneur asked him if he ever regretted exposing Robert and destroying their friendship. "I regret that Robert made the choices he made," James replied. "I regret that our friendship ended the way it did. But I don't regret standing up for myself and for all the other people he hurt. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting painful consequences, but the alternative, staying silent and allowing injustice to continue, is much worse. Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" James thought about the question for a moment. "Forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person," he said finally. "It's something you do for yourself, to free yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it. What I can say is that I've learned to separate my anger at Robert's actions from my memories of our friendship. The good times we had were real, even if they ended badly." After the conference, James drove to Riverside Park, to the playground where he and Robert had met for their final conversation. He sat on the same swing where Robert had confessed his crimes and asked for James's help. James thought about the journey that had brought him to this point, the betrayal that had nearly destroyed him, the investigation that had revealed the full scope of Robert's crimes, the success of LocalLink, and the foundation he'd built to help other victims. He thought about the letter Robert had sent from prison and the book he was supposedly writing. James had heard from Agent Martinez that Robert was indeed participating in victim impact programs and that his cooperation had helped several other victims recover stolen work. Maybe Robert was genuinely trying to change. Maybe he was finally understanding the impact of his actions and working to make amends. Or maybe it was just another manipulation, another attempt to rehabilitate his image. James realized that it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had built something meaningful from the wreckage of their friendship. He had turned his pain into purpose, his anger into action, his betrayal into a mission to help others. LocalLink was thriving, connecting communities and supporting local businesses exactly as he'd envisioned. His foundation was helping victims of intellectual property theft get justice and compensation. His advocacy work was leading to stronger protections for creators and entrepreneurs. Robert had tried to steal James's future, but instead, he had inadvertently given James something even more valuable: a deeper understanding of his own strength, a clearer sense of his values, and a mission that went far beyond just building a successful app. As James sat on the swing in the fading afternoon light, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years when thinking about Robert: peace. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a sense of closure and acceptance. Robert had made his choices, and he was living with the consequences. James had made his choices too, and they had led him to a life of purpose, success, and integrity. The friendship that had lasted 20 years was over, destroyed by betrayal and greed. But from its ashes, James had built something better. A business that helped communities, a foundation that protected victims, and a life that was guided by principles rather than profit. In the end, that was the best revenge of all. Not just surviving Robert's betrayal, but using it as the foundation for something meaningful and lasting. James had won not by destroying Robert, but by refusing to be destroyed himself. As he walked back to his car, James felt grateful for the journey that had brought him to this point. It had been painful, difficult, and sometimes overwhelming, but it had also been transformative. He was no longer the naive entrepreneur who had trusted his best friend with his most precious ideas. He was someone stronger, wiser, and more purposeful. He was someone who understood that true success came not from what you could take from others, but from what you could give to the world. And that understanding, born from betrayal and forged in the fire of injustice, would guide him for the rest of his life. Epilogue: 10 years later. The auditorium at Stanford Business School was packed with students, faculty, and entrepreneurs who had come to hear James Sullivan speak about ethics in business and the long-term value of integrity. At 38, James had become one of the most respected voices in the tech industry, known not just for his business success, but for his advocacy work and his commitment to ethical practices. LocalLink had grown into a platform used by millions of people across North America, connecting communities and supporting local businesses in ways that had exceeded even James's original vision. The company had gone public 3 years earlier, making James one of the youngest billionaires in the tech industry. But it was his foundation work that James was most proud of. The Sullivan Foundation for Intellectual Property Protection had helped over 500 victims of business fraud recover stolen work and receive compensation. The foundation had also successfully lobbied for stronger IP protection laws and had established legal aid clinics in major cities across the country. 10 years ago, James began his presentation. I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about building a great product, finding the right investors, and beating the competition. I learned the hard way that real success is about much more than that. James told the story of Robert's betrayal, the investigation that followed, and the lessons he'd learned about the importance of integrity in business. He spoke about the victims of intellectual property theft and the need for stronger protections for creators and entrepreneurs. The most important lesson I learned, James concluded, is that how you build your success matters as much as the success itself. You can achieve great things through deception and theft, but that success will always be hollow and ultimately unsustainable. True success, the kind that lasts and that you can be proud of, can only be built on a foundation of honesty, integrity, and respect for others. During the Q&A session, a student asked the question that James had been expecting. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your friend hadn't stolen your idea? I used to wonder about that, James replied. But I've come to believe that everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. Robert's betrayal was devastating, but it also taught me lessons about resilience, integrity, and purpose that I never would have learned otherwise. It forced me to become a better person and a better leader. Do you have any contact with him now? No. Robert was released from prison 2 years ago, and as far as I know, he's trying to rebuild his life. I wish him well, but our paths are separate now. Some relationships can't be repaired, and that's okay. After the presentation, James was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Sarah Kim. Not the freelancer whose work Robert had stolen, but her daughter, who is now a business student at Stanford. My mother wanted me to thank you, the young woman said. The settlement she received from your case allowed her to start her own agency, and she's been successful ever since. She says you gave her back her faith in justice. James felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with his business success. Please tell your mother that I'm glad things worked out for her. She deserved so much better than what happened to her. As James drove home from Stanford, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately become the foundation for everything meaningful in his life. He thought about Robert, somewhere out there trying to rebuild his life after prison. James had heard through mutual acquaintances that Robert was working as a junior marketing coordinator at a small nonprofit, using his skills to help charitable organizations rather than for personal profit. Maybe he had genuinely changed. Maybe he had learned from his mistakes and was trying to make amends. James hoped that was true, not because he was ready to forgive or forget, but because he believed in the possibility of redemption for anyone willing to do the hard work of change. When James arrived home, he found his wife Sarah, a different Sarah, whom he'd met at a conference on business ethics, waiting for him with their 2 young children. They had built a life together based on honesty, trust, and shared values. Everything that had been missing from his relationship with Robert. "How was the presentation?" Sarah asked as their 5-year-old daughter ran to hug him. "Good. Meaningful. It never gets easier talking about what happened, but I think it's important for people to hear the story. The students are lucky to learn from your experience. Not everyone gets to hear from someone who's been through something like that and come out stronger." That evening, as James was putting his children to bed, his daughter asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Daddy, why do you tell people about the mean man who stole from you?" James thought about how to explain complex concepts of justice, integrity, and purpose to a 5-year-old. "Because I want to help other people avoid getting hurt the way I was hurt. And I want them to know that even when bad things happen, you can still build something good from them. Like how you built LocalLink. Exactly like that. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us teach us the most important lessons." Later that night, James sat in his home office, looking at the framed photo on his desk. Not a picture of his business success or his awards, but a photo of the first small business owner who had told him that LocalLink had saved her restaurant during the pandemic. That photo reminded him every day why his work mattered and why the painful journey that had led him here had been worth it. James opened his laptop and began writing his weekly blog post for the Foundation's website. This week, he was writing about the importance of supporting victims of business fraud and the need for continued vigilance against intellectual property theft. As he wrote, James felt grateful for the path his life had taken. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed him had ultimately led him to his true purpose: building businesses that helped communities, protecting creators from theft and fraud, and advocating for integrity in an industry that too often rewarded deception. Robert had tried to steal James's future, but instead he had given him something far more valuable: the knowledge that true success could only be built on a foundation of honesty, integrity, and service to others. And that knowledge, born from betrayal and forged in the fire of injustice, had become the guiding principle of James's life and work. In the end, the best revenge hadn't been destroying Robert or seeing him go to prison. The best revenge had been building a life of meaning, purpose, and integrity. A life that proved that good could triumph over evil, that justice could prevail over deception, and that the right choices, even when they were difficult, always led to the best outcomes. James finished his blog post and closed his laptop, feeling at peace with the journey that had brought him to this point. Tomorrow, he would continue his work of building businesses that helped communities and protecting creators from the kind of betrayal he had experienced. But tonight, he was simply grateful for his family, his success, his purpose, and even for the painful lessons that had taught him who he really was and what he was truly capable of achieving. The naive young man who had trusted his best friend with his most precious ideas was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more purposeful. And that transformation, as painful as it had been, was the greatest success of all. The end. This story of friendship, betrayal, and ultimate redemption reminds us that our greatest challenges often become our most meaningful purposes. Through James's journey from victim to advocate, we see that true success isn't measured by what we can take from others, but by what we can give to the world. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us actually show us who we're truly meant to become. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more compelling tales of resilience, justice, and the triumph of integrity over deception. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that even the deepest betrayals can become the foundation for something meaningful and lasting.